Good evening, folks. Every day in South Africa, 83 people are murdered, but some cases don't begin with strangers. They begin right inside the home. And some cases, like the one tonight, seem to truly defy the laws of nature also. Tonight, we break down one such case, the case of Busisiwe Labi, a mother from Dimbaza who suffocated her two young sons after years of silence, conflict, and emotional collapse. This is a harrowing story, so be prepared for the detail. I was I jumped on a call earlier today with tonight's guest to discuss the case, and in just the space of 5 minutes, she managed to traumatize me with the story. So we're all going to go through that a little bit over the course of the next hour. Please do, before I introduce tonight's guest, please do subscribe if you haven't. Hit the like button if you enjoy our conversations, and of course, you're welcome to become a member. Drop us a super like, but most importantly, please do contribute to the chat. If you'd like to just say hello or drop us a comment or ask a question, then of course we are happy to oblige. I'll be fielding those over the course of the show. Gerard is away this week, as we mentioned last week, but joining me, we have a very special guest. Joining me is Colonel Retired Kirsten Clarke, former SAPS Investigative Psychologist. Welcome once again to Profiler, Kirsten. I look forward to Gerard being away these days because I get to fill in the time with some of our amazing friends and, friends from around the crime universe. So welcome once again.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure being on. So I'm happy to be here again and share this really, really scary case with you, as always.
No, exactly. Like I said, we got into a kind of a conversation about it this morning where you were just kind of talking me through the nuts and bolts, and we were on the verge of basically doing the whole podcast on the phone this morning. So I called a stop. I was like, listen, let's save this for tonight because this one is going to be fascinating. Before we get into the case, before we start talking about and there's lots of issues in relation to tonight's case that we can discuss as well. I think especially in the context of, the previous week, and, we're all thinking about GBV and violence against women, etc. But just remind our audience a little bit about your background. Just fill in the gaps for us once again for those that might not have caught you on the podcast previously.
Okay, so I am a clinical psychologist and I've been one for 11 years. I retired from SAPS last year in November after being with the unit for 7 years. It was the best and the worst time of my working career, if I could put it that way. It is, how can I say it? I had some of the best moments in my career working with a lot of really, really good cops and some really interesting cases that really challenged me and pushed my boundaries. But at the same time, the work itself is really dark. And you carry a lot with you. You bring it home. It kind of muddies up your family life and stuff like that. But yeah, it's I was with the unit for 7 years, loved it. Being a forensic psychologist in South Africa within the police service is a totally unique experience. The closest I can come to describing the investigative psychology sections is probably a bit like the behavioral analyst unit in the FBI. So that's like SA's version, like squad cars, but psychology.
Yeah, exactly. How much, I'm not asking you this, how much of your working time there did you actually overlap with Gerard?
Sadly, I miss Gerard. So he left in 2015 and I joined in 2018. Okay. And when I actually joined the unit, there were no psychologists at all in the unit. And I had to phone Gerard and go, please help me. I don't know what I'm doing, because quite honestly, our training doesn't adequately prepare you for this particular role. I think it prepares you for forensic psychology work within the private sector. But I think that when it comes to doing actual investigative psychology work, our training doesn't cover that. And it's very much a learn on the fly kind of work. So Gerard very kindly mentored me through at least the first 6 months. And I think even after that, I would still phone him randomly and just say, look, I've got this case. I need some help. It was tricky in the beginning, not going to lie. but it was a steep learning curve, but definitely worth it.
Yeah. Was it a fair amount of kind of working in relative isolation then? I mean, you have the likes of Gerard to mentor from a distance, but, as far as kind of plying your trade as the forensic psychologist, was there ever an occasion where you were able to be in a room with a bunch of other psychologists and really unpack a case, for example, or, challenge an idea or...
It happened really. We've had psychologists come and go in the unit. And I think that the chance to be able to sit and dissect a case with another psychologist is always ideal. I didn't personally have much of an opportunity to do that. I work with the criminologists quite a bit. And luckily my team in Western Cape, when I was based there before I came up to Pretoria, we managed to kind of all train each other in what was going on. So they helped me with the police stuff, helping with the psychology stuff. And that worked quite well because I was able to then talk out cases with them. It is quite isolated in that your work is kind of your work and you have to just get on with it within the context of like the greater case that's going on. Yeah. There's not a lot of opportunity to talk because there's so few psychologists involved in the unit.
Yeah. I think one thing that always kind of amazes people as well, maybe something that you kind of touched on when you talked about, you're still in the kind of in the wake of retirement, if you like, and leaving the police service. I think a lot of people are generally quite astounded at how people are able to kind of handle the kind of level of trauma that they experience, that you witness in the course of doing a job like this. On reflection now, having got a bit of space from it, how much do you and how do you kind of literally carry the burden of it in your life on a day-to-day basis, and how do you deal with it, and what coping mechanisms do you have to put in place to be able to kind of quiet it out if it becomes noisy again,
Boxing everything in your head, compartmentalizing worked really well for me. Something that I had to learn in the beginning because I was obviously trying to play catch up. So I was bringing work home with me in the evening, which was a huge no-no. And eventually it got to the point where my husband actually said to me, please don't bring the files home. It's actually just to, because he accidentally caught me going through a crime scene photo album about 3 months into my time at SAPS. And he was like, we can't actually bring this stuff home.
Yeah.
But the stuff, everything that you do during the day kind of stays with you. So if you look at a crime scene album during the day, or you have to help with categorizing child pornography, for example, that kind of stuff sort of sticks with you. So often I would have to say to like my family, I'm just going through some stuff at work at the moment, and I'm not going to really be checked in for the next few days, which isn't exactly fair to your family, but it's one way of coping. The other way that I found really useful was to be able to talk to people in the unit who have a unique understanding of exactly what you're going through, because they see it every day as well. They're going through exactly the same thing. Yeah. And I still have a lot of those friendships, and we're still in contact, and they really are the only people that really get what you go through on a day-to-day basis. Helps to have your own therapy as well. I think every psychologist, especially a forensic psychologist, needs to have their own person that they can go and offload to. But it's really difficult for someone to understand if they haven't been through the process of all of it. But definitely trying to box it is the best way of doing it. The other thing that I found quite useful, and I think I've mentioned this before, is to see it as a puzzle as opposed to like real life people, if I could put it that way. It becomes easier to take that step back so that you're able to gain distance and be able to apply yourself clinically to something, as opposed to being caught up in the whole thing about, well, this was someone who was someone's mother, daughter, brother, brother, father, uncle. And it is easier to see them as being a puzzle and I have to figure out the why of what happened, as opposed to, the other detectives will do the what, when, how, and the where. But our job is always to give the why. And I think that looking at it that way is much better than trying to take it home with you or keep it inside yourself. Having said that, though, there's certain cases that definitely hit a note. And this was one of them. I have to be honest. This was definitely one of them.
Well, you absolutely took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say there must be then those cases which are just quite impossible to kind of keep your emotional being away from. And as we segue into the discussion, I just want to say hi to some folks who are joining the chat. We've got every week I get it nice and then it jumps out too big the first time, but there you go. It'll just be part of our new shtick. Okay, good evening from sunny St. Francis, from Anne. We've got Tanya. Finally, she catches alive in time. Fantastic. Welcome, Tanya. Tetrafin, hi all. Ach, your intro freaks me out every time. Well, I'm glad. I hope in a good way. Finally, hello from London. Welcome to our friends in the UK. We've got Eastern Pennsylvania joining us, Cape Town, and Anne already. I'm shocked that you still get traumatized with what happens in South Africa. We're so used to crime in our lovely country. Unfortunately, we're a little bit too used to it, Anne. And tonight we're going to talk about a case, that hopefully a case that nobody will ever be used to. It's not one of those cases you could ever kind of, I think, sit comfortably in your stomach in any way, shape, or form, because it's really quite disturbing. Now, we were talking a little bit, Kirsten, about, how, working in the unit and working on this kind of, in this world, how it affects you. How has it affected your view when you kind of perceive the violence problem in South Africa? This week, there's been a big focus on GBV, and everyone's been posting their purple squares and their support for women and, raising that issue to the forefront. Are you able to be positive about the crime issue and about the issues with violence that we experience in South Africa, or do you get or is it easier to fall into that cynical kind of trap?
Yeah, there's a two-edged kind of answer two-sided kind of answer to that one. The first one is that when I went into this job, I was incredibly naive and optimistic. I think I had a worldview that there was good in everybody, and I think what this has taught me is that a lot of the people that I interviewed as accused and suspects were just ordinary people. So it's kind of shook my foundation a little as to, that there are definitely like good people and bad people in the world. It's now more on a spectrum of like, I can't judge anyone really from face, like, just like a quick meeting. The second thing I do want to say is that despite all the challenges that we have, I mean, South Africa does have a unique crime profile, both in the demographics of the offenders and the types of crimes. I mean, they send people from overseas to kind of look at our crimes because it's like the most intense training you can get in the world. It's like being a trauma surgeon at Baragwanath. So it's, it's terrifying from that point of view. But having said that, there were amazing people that I met during my time at SAPS who have built their careers around being, exceptional detectives and really good cops. So I think once you get to a level where it's a specialized unit, there's, guys and there's women that are phenomenal at what they do. And I think that we very often will slam the police for not doing exactly what they should be doing. And yes, there's definitely cases where that happens for sure. But on the whole, it's the people that I worked with were really great and dedicated and brilliant at what they did. So, I think it's one thing to hear about the crime. I think it's quite different to live it every day and to see the depths to which people will go to. When you see murder first thing in the morning before you've had your cup of coffee when you get to the office, it gets a little hard to step away from it and say, okay.
Are you able to be more hopeful than you are skeptical, despite kind of what you've witnessed?
I am, definitely.
Okay. It took me a while to start feeling that way again. It took me like a little bit of time to decompress from the whole thing. It's been a year since I left, and I'm starting to kind of feel a little bit more hopeful and optimistic about stuff. There was a time where I was really cynical, and sort of, towards the end, it got hard. It was hard to keep that sort of optimism alive.
Yeah. Look, it's also helped by the fact that if you drive down 3 or 4 roads in Joburg, thanks to the G20, it looks beautiful in town as well. Anyway, if you happen to be at the right intersection. All right, so take us to Dimbaza. Let's dive into tonight's case then. And really, I mean, we're going to sit back, folks, and we're going to kind of grab our coffees and we're going to kind of listen in a little bit of horror at tonight's story as Kirsten kind of relays to us the tale of Busisiwe Labi. But contextualize the space. Where are we? Dimbaza. Where is that? And tell us a little bit about the community.
Kirsten, Dimbaza is in the Eastern Cape, round about the Bishu area. And it is, again, a very poor community that has a lot of unemployment, and it's not built up. You know, it's definitely one of the poorer communities I've seen. It's very remote as well. It's not, it has, how can I put it, like some link to city life, but it's very far removed. So a lot of people leave there to go to Port Elizabeth to find work. And I think that there's a lot of children who are being raised by grandparents and by other family members. It seems like it seemed like a very hard place to live, a very hard place to make a living.
Okay. And you talk about, folks being maybe raised by the grandparents, etc. Busisiwe was one such person.
Yes. So Busisiwe actually she had a bit of a sad backstory. So her father died when she was very young, when she was still a baby, really. And her mother actually left the area and went to Port Elizabeth and worked as a domestic. So she wasn't at home. And Busisiwe was actually raised by her grandmother. And she had a normal schooling career up until grade 11. And then she actually ended up failing grade 12. And after that, she went and she did a few courses in sort of teacher assistant training. So, like early development training. So she did a couple of courses in that. And then she had done other things, like she had worked in a factory making feeding bags, and a factory working with making plastic stuff. So a very typical story of a person who comes from that kind of area, with an absent parent and raised by grandparents, and just choosing to have a life that was very, very similar to a lot of people who kind of came up through that place. Can you hear me? I seem to have frozen.
Yes, no, I can hear you loud and clear. You haven't frozen on our side, so we're all good. Okay. I'll let you, if we freeze, then you'll see a please subscribe to the channel advert pop up, okay?
Okay, all right, yeah. Just checking.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so she was like a very average person from that area. There was nothing that kind of stuck out terribly from her childhood, other than the fact that her mom was absent, her father had passed away, and she was raised by her grandparents in this very poor community that doesn't have a lot of resources and is, socioeconomically on the low end of the scale.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, in South Africa? If we talk about kind of again, in this week where we're doing a lot of focus on the kind of violence issues in the country, and, men as obviously kind of the primary perpetrators of violence and the majority perpetrators of violence. But, there is a reality in South Africa that we have to own up to, that, a lot of young people do come from broken homes where they're not necessarily, where yes, they might be being raised by well-intentioned grandparents, but, maybe there's, a lot of a lack of a male role model, for example, in a lot of people's lives.
I think what's important to kind of realize, is that it is what we call a sort of predisposing factor. So it's considered to be a risk factor for maybe, let's take it, for example, if you grew up in a very physically abusive home, you have a predisposition towards being violent later in life. But as you know, not every person who grows up in a physically violent home goes on to then perpetrate acts of violence later in life. So it's what we call a predisposing factor. It's not like if you grew up like that, you're definitely going to end up like this. I think that's important to know. And it is a common thing that we see in South Africa. It's not, the nuclear family of mom, dad, and 2 kids staying in one house is not what we normally see, especially if you go into the townships and the rural areas. That's actually unusual, really unusual. So, there was nothing uniquely or spectacularly terrible about her childhood. I mean, she described her time with her grandmother as being, it was good, that her grandmother really understood her, that they got on well. The wheels kind of fell off after her grandmother died, and she ended up having to go live back with her mom when her mom had retired. And that was kind of where things started to really break down, because she didn't have a good relationship with her mother at all. She actually felt that her mother had betrayed her because she had kept details about Busisiwe's father away from her until she was actually in high school. And she was really quite angry about that. So the main thing kind of seemed to escalate once she had gone home and was living with her mother.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to launch into the bit that might kind of give a background to it before I actually go into the whole horrible details of it. She was actually lesbian, and that orientation was not recognized by her family. It was not supported by her family. So she had felt deeply pressured to actually have heterosexual relationships and then to have children as well. That was something that she put across quite strongly when I interviewed her, is that she had felt this pressure to reproduce, and that her family were basically denying who she was on some, on a very basic level, that they were denying her sexuality. And it definitely was a big precipitating factor in this case, was her sexual orientation, and then this pressure she felt to have children.
Okay. Just as well, just give us an idea of, while we're talking through this, or while we're talking through the case, of just what your involvement in the case was as well. So just how kind of close to Busisiwe did you sit down and speak with her on a number of occasions? Just talk us through that aspect.
Okay, so she was in a correctional facility, and it was actually quite a difficult interview because they wouldn't allow me to see her face to face in an office. So we had to sit with the plexiglass between us, which was the first time I'd ever done an interview like that. Normally you get accommodated in an office and you can sit with the person like literally across a desk. This was quite difficult because we had to do it through the prison visiting kind of glass wall. So I went and I saw her at the correctional center, and then after that I went and visited her sister in Dimbaza and got some collateral from her. So the purpose behind my interviewing her was they wanted to have some kind of reason that they could put forward to the court
in order to guide sentencing, because obviously with a case where a mother kills her children, there's a lot of questions as to why would that happen, because it is such a heinous crime. I sound like an episode from SVU, but it is something that is particularly beyond the scope of what people would expect in South Africa. Like, mothers don't kill their children. That seems to be a narrative that's quite strong. So the court specifically wanted a report on the reasons why she did it. So that was kind of my involvement. Was I came in to interview her, speak to her about what actually happened, as well as getting all the history and everything, because that's what we normally do. And so it's definitely, it was that purpose for the court.
Okay.
I can see there's a question there about how old was she when?
What age was she when she went back to live with her mum?
Okay, she was actually quite a bit older. She was born in 1987. So at the time of when I interviewed her, she was already 34 years old. And I think her grandmother passed away in 2018. So I saw her in 2020. Let's have a look. 2021. So she would have been around 29 years old. No, I lie. 32. Okay. 31, 32 when she went to live back with her mom. So I can understand that it would have been quite hectic, because obviously she didn't grow up with her mother, and now she has to live with someone who she didn't see a lot of when she was growing up. Wasn't her primary maternal figure at all. And when she moved in with her mom, she then also ended up living with her sister, who was 10 years older than her, and her brother, who was round about the same age. They were born very close together. And in addition to her having a conflictual relationship with her mother, she really struggled with her brother. Like, their relationship was not good at all. And she felt that her mother actually favored her brother, especially financially. So her brother had a bit of a drinking problem, reportedly, according to Busisiwe, and also according to her sister. So their brother would often drink away his pay, and then he would come and he would ask for money from the mother, and that money was normally supposed to be used for groceries or stuff, and then her mother would give it to the brother, and then the kids would go hungry, and there wouldn't be gas in the house. So there was a lot that was kind of going on from that point of view. I think she had a relatively stable life up until 2018 when her grandmother died.
Okay. And just a sense of her personality, her kind of disposition. What was she like?
Okay, so she came across in quite an unusual way. So we talk a lot about mood and affect when we are interviewing someone. We gauge what their mood is. So are they depressed? Are they manic? Are they normal? So typically when someone has a normal personality, we say that they have a normal mood. We say that they have a euthymic mood. That's the terminology we use. But linked in with that, we also look at affect. So affect is how you react to particular subjects that you're discussing. So if you're talking about, say, for example, killing your children, but you're smiling, that is considered to be inappropriate affect. So your facial expressions, your non-verbals don't match the topic that you're talking about. So someone can be euthymic, in other words, they can be normal, but they can have an inappropriate affect. And that was exactly the case with Busisiwe. So she was fine, like she was calm, not showing any emotion related to anything that was going on. Like, I had to even prompt her to talk about the court case, because she was more concerned about other things, like a relationship that she had started in the prison, as opposed to talking about how she felt about the court case and what had happened to her children. And just very focused on like the outcome of what was happening. She did believe that she shouldn't go in for a custodial sentence. She firmly believed that she should have been sent to like the local hospital, psychiatric hospital, to get assistance and be released back into the community, because she felt that she needed to heal and get over like the relationship with her mom, this whole betrayal about not knowing about her dad, and the sexual orientation linked with being almost forced to have children. So it was like you have to kind of, I remember having to like redirect her a lot back to talking about what happened as opposed to her volunteering the information, which is unusual for me. I've often found that people are really easy, like most of the accused I speak to are quite happy to tell you what happened. This was unusual for me in that she was just more, she seemed more distracted by the other things as opposed to telling me her story and about like why everything had played out the way it did.
Okay. Look, I mean, I think it's a good time for us to talk about what actually happened, and perhaps now we're kind of talking about how she is engaged with it, kind of related to us as she related it to you. Talk us through the incident then, and what actually what happened in the build-up, and what actually happened with the crime.
Okay, so just to give a little bit more of a background. So
Yes,
after her grandmother died, she, as I mentioned, she moved in with her mom and her brother and her sister. And during that time, before the incident, she had a very conflictual relationship with her mother, mostly around her mother's treatment of her brother. And what had happened in the day before the incident, she had another fight with her mom. And it was around her mother giving her brother money again. And she kind of sat and fumed about it for the day and said that she had thoughts about how she couldn't carry on living with her mother, that she didn't like what was happening with her brother. She was really, really angry and felt very frustrated with the whole situation. That night, she came up with this idea of killing the children and basically committing suicide herself. But she sort of went to sleep that night and didn't do anything. In the morning, everybody woke up. Her mother had a scheduled visit at the clinic locally, so her mom went off, and then her sister and her brother went to work, and she was left alone with her children. So she had two boys. One of them was 6 years old and one of them was a year old. And she made them breakfast and bathed them, and then sort of carried on thinking about what she was going to do, and eventually decided, like early in the morning, it was around about 9, that she was going to kill her children and then try to commit suicide. So this is the bit that's really horrible. She took both the children into the bedroom and told her 6-year-old that she was going to kill him. And she willingly said that he begged her not to kill him. But she took a plastic bag and she put it over his head, and then she forced him down onto the bed and she put a pillow over his face. And he basically suffocated to death. And after that, she took the 1-year-old and she did the same thing to the 1-year-old. Then she basically laid them on the bed. We sorted out the pillows and the blankets and made it all neat. She then went through to the kitchen and found some cockroach poison, and she mixed it with milk, which medically we know if it kind of stops the effects of the poison and actually makes you vomit. So it was not really clear if she genuinely meant to commit suicide, but she definitely drank some cockroach poison. She then phoned her mom to make sure that her mom wasn't on the way back from the clinic, because she said she didn't want her mom to find the bodies. But then she phoned her sister and told her sister what she had done. So her sister, in a panic, then phoned the neighbor. And the neighbor came rushing over to the house and found Busi in the lounge sitting on the couch, feeling a little bit dizzy and nauseous, and went to the bedroom, found the 2 children dead on the bed, and then came out and called the police. The community then sort of descended on the house, and she had to be removed by the police for her own safety.
and she was taken for medical treatment, but she wasn't hospitalized. And then she was obviously arrested and placed in custody.
Sure.
So, yeah, what a thing.
You know, we talk a lot about a lot of bad things on this show, but you know, it's really hard not to have a really like just kind of guttural, like deep reaction to that story. You know, it just flies in the. I mean, again, it's sad to think we become desensitized to kind of male on male, you know, male violence, men enacting violence, but it just seems so insanely evil when a mother does that to her own children.
There's a couple of cases that have really stuck out for me, and this was one of them. There was also another one that I did where a mother gave birth and then pangered her baby to death.
Sure.
Those two really stuck with me because I'm a mom. On some sort of really visceral level, it was, I don't know, it just kind of, it shook me a bit because I think we have this perception that women don't do these things. Although obviously once you're in the field and you work, you know that women do these things as well. But it's cases where parents kill their children that are really sort of like, how do you explain that? How do you make sense of it? Because we are raised in a society where mothers are supposed to be these wonderful, nurturing, safe spaces. And when a mother kills her own children, it definitely shakes that challenge, and challenges that perception that we have. And that's something that's been seen all over the world, is that a mother who kills her children is vilified for one, understandably, but also regarded in some ways kind of as being worse than men who kill their children.
No, this is kind of where it's hard not to kind of place it in kind of ultimate evil kind of rankings kind of thing. That's the thing. And, you know, it's not, you know, again, it's not only men, you know, again, men commit these kinds of crimes too, you know, it's and more often men are violent. We know this, but yeah, it just feels so unnatural and so wrong, doesn't it? It's also the fact that, I mean, you know, when we talk about a serial murder case, for example, and, you know, you've got somebody who's a sexual sadist out kind of murdering people for the satisfaction and the feeling that, you know, that they get from certain acts. Often you'll find that there's those really intimate acts, you know, as Stuart Vilken, the strangulation, that suffocating, that being really close and intimate with, and it's just the nature of the way that this was done as well. She did it in a manner that wasn't distanced from you know, it wasn't distanced from the victim. It's extremely intimate and it's her children and their babies, you know?
Yeah. That was the shocking part of it for me. Was, I think the worst part was when she said to me that her 6-year-old begged her not to kill him. That freaked me out so badly. I really struggled with that for quite a while afterwards, was how to make sense of it. I see someone put postpartum depression had played a role in the murders. We had a look at postpartum depression, but she didn't present with any other symptoms of how there were no symptoms of depression that were reported. Like, she had no major depressive episodes throughout her life. There had been times where things were difficult. She was low. But the biggest thing that she actually seemed to have a problem with was anger. So she had been in physical altercations before. When she was working at a creche, she had actually attacked one of the parents and sort of physically grabbed this woman and had a bit of a fight with her. And even in her recounting of things that she had trouble with in her life, anger came across really strong. She would punch things if she was feeling frustrated, or she would, break things. And she seemed to really have a problem with how to deal with conflicts in ways that were adaptive and psychologically acceptable, socially acceptable. I think the anger part of it came out really, really strongly, and it played a huge role in the actual commission of the offense. Like, she was angry at her mom, angry at her brother, and there was this sort of, in a sense, I want them to feel the pain that I'm feeling. You wanted me to have these children. This was not something I wanted. So I think that just all built up and spilled over into this really horrible thing.
And look, I mean, maybe she wants to direct that anger directly at the people who she's most angry at. But then there's also, I mean, it kind of makes it worse. It makes it worse for me. It's like, well, you don't have the guts to take on your brother. You know what I mean? Or you don't feel like that's a fight. That's not something a hill you can climb kind of thing. But your little kids who are vulnerable and aren't actually in a direct sense the reason that you're angry in the first place, are they? Yes, they kind of are compounded in your mind what your problems are for yourself. But sure. Why? Let me get. Sorry, I'm just a little bit flustered because the story really does throw me. Let me go back to my questions here. What I wanted to ask a little bit about is this perception, and talk a little bit about. There is this perception, and I think we need to be aware of it, at least as a society, especially these days. Is that, and at times like this, where it is very easy to see men solely as the kind of perpetrators of violent acts, or vast majority that basically it's men that commit violence, and women as the victims of violence, and It is important for us to remember that we've got to be on the lookout for these kind of extreme behaviors from all corners of society.
I think that's actually a really, really good point. And it was something that was also, it also struck me quite strongly when I was at SAPS, was the majority of the victims that I dealt with were women or children, right? But there were also a number of male victims as well. And that brought home to me that this idea that rape is typically only, it's a woman victim, female victim crime. And it's not that way anymore. I think the challenges that we have in terms of understanding how often it happens is that most men don't report. I think one of the last studies I read said it's like 1 to 2 men out of 10 will report a sexual assault or a rape. So I think that also skews a lot of the statistics. And I think we need to acknowledge that for sure that there are probably a lot more male victims out there than we even think exist. It's a much wider societal problem. Yeah. Having said that, though, I do think that males are most likely the perpetrators of any kind of sort of assault, especially sexual assaults. It's very unusual to have a woman sexually assaulting a male. It does happen, but it is, it is that kind of feeling that
I got a little bit kind of a little bit people kind of disagreeing with me. I made a comment on social media the other day, just that we should also remember that when it comes to murder, for example, as much as 87% of murder victims are men, and whilst yes, they are the overwhelming perpetrators of crime in South Africa, they are also, when it comes to just general violence, the overwhelming victims of crime as well. And the sentiment that came back to me when I pointed this out was, okay, men, sit down, guys, stop talking now. It's not time it's our time now to talk about the issues that we confront, etc. And my comment was simply, okay, when is the time that we actually then focus on our young men? And if, the majority of violence crime is happening, that men are both the perpetrators and the victims, how do we make space when we are addressing men as the perpetrators, also make space for them as the victims as well, and realize that, yes, we need to point out to them the errors of their way, but at some point somebody's got to kind of offer a hug and offer to begin the healing process when it comes to men. I don't want to get distracted too much from the case that we're discussing now, but it is, I think we do have to make more space and be more conscious of the fact that men are the victims of violent crime in South Africa to a large degree, and we need to be able to see men as victims as much as we see women as victims of violent crime as well.
Yeah, I think the important distinction there is the violent crime. I think when you take it as being murder, it's definitely more male on male. I think that distinction maybe needs to be made.
Yes, of course.
Whereas sexually based offenses generally tend to be male perpetrator, female or child victim. So I think if you look at it in terms of murder, gang violence, assaults, so assault with a deadly weapon, blunt force trauma, that kind of thing, then definitely it is male on male perpetrators for sure.
Yeah. That said, I think I would like to see more campaigns that target men in more of a compassionate way. And when you diminish just the general violence that pervades society from, coming from men, then you diminish all crime diminishes when you tackle the big, that's also, yes, I think, worth consideration, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's what is also needed is we focus a lot on the victims of crime. I think if we could do something about the perpetrators of violent offenses, that might be something that would reduce that incident of crime overall. So rather than telling women not to walk in certain areas, not to dress a certain way, not to watch your drink when you go out, don't go with a stranger who you've never met, all of those things. I think that it's important to say that those things apply to men as well, but also 100%. To start addressing why there is that level of GBV in South Africa. Like, where does it come from? What are the roots of it? And I think that's really important. I don't know if there's been enough focus on that.
I agree 100% because, there are countries all over the world that have been through a lot of kind of historical trauma and don't have the same rates of GBV. It seems we do have to ask ourselves much more seriously, why are women and children so preyed upon in this culture, in this society in South Africa? We understand that there have been traumas over generations and there are social issues and economic issues that feed into these all of these problems. But yeah, absolutely. And addressing men, like you say, having more conversations, being able to talk about it again, as opposed to doing too much finger pointing, a little bit more kind of inviting into a circle of discussion to talk about the issue and start to understand what the real root causes are and how to address them in society in a really meaningful way. Like I say, I mean, I'm a great supporter. We talk a lot about on the show about kind of the fact that it is crazy how much women and children are victims of kind of gender-based violence. That said, I just don't feel like we see enough focus on kind of men as victims as well. But let's not hop on that point too much, because yeah, I could talk about that all night. What psychological issues are at play here with Busisiwe, in your opinion? And considering how much time you had to engage with her and speak with her.
Okay, so there was no evidence of any mood disorders. She had some delusional thinking, but not enough to diagnose her as being, psychotic or delusional. In terms of the personality structure, she had some elements of narcissism, but again, not enough to diagnose a full disorder. I think the biggest things that were present with her were that her impulse control was really, really poor. and her insight and judgment were really poor as well. So what we mean by that is impulse control is the ability to stop yourself from doing something because you realize that it's not appropriate. So, I feel like an extreme example, I feel like having sex while I'm at work, but I'm not going to just grab someone and go into a closet and have sex with them. I'm going to wait until I get home and have sex with my partner. That would be an example of good impulse control. So for her, it was definitely the impulse control was really poor. Insight and judgment refers to the ability to reflect on your actions and how they affect other people. So how self-aware are you, basically? And are you able to look at what you've done and look at how you think and see the impact it has on your behavior and how it affects everyone else around you? So those were the things that really stuck out for me when I interviewed her, and it was confirmed by the collateral with her sister, was that she did have this thing. I think it's important to note that not everybody who murders kind of fits into that sociopathic, psychopathic kind of mode of, how can I put it, like the psychological profile. So I think the thing to remember is that psychopathy and sociopathy are sort of like mainstream titles that we give to people who seem to do really terrible things. So as a diagnosis, it's not something that we would, specifically write on a file that this person is, the diagnosis is psychopathy or sociopathy. We use it as being like a catch-all term to describe someone who has a number of features of narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and maybe elements of sadism and, just the things that relate to those disorders. So I guess the things that you would include there would be a disregard for authority, disregard for the rules, an inflated sense of self, very egotistical, low empathy, poor insight and judgment into how their behavior affects other people. Even if they have that insight and judgment, it doesn't actually make a difference to what they do. So I think that's quite important to know. So I think, I think it's important to know that it's also ordinary people. And this is something that Jared and I have spoken about quite a lot, is that these murderers are quite often normal people, and there's been cases where you've gone into the community or gone to interview family members and they're like, I did not see this coming, that this was so totally out of left field. That's also important to remember, is a lot of them are ordinary people who act on something that is happening within their environment.
Did she have any kind of issue with what she did? I mean, did she have anything negative to say about the experience of actually doing that?
That was really interesting, because that's something we always check for, is the presence of remorse or regret or guilt or shame. For her, she didn't have any remorse for what she had done. She expressed regret. So regret is what we typically see is where I know it was bad and I got caught for it. That's the kind of vibe that you get with regret. The thing that did come up is, and this is what I thought was quite interesting, was she was only able to express that at a superficial level. So a lot of it was self-referential. How does it affect me? So now I'm going to go to jail for saying, yes, I killed my children, but I don't think I deserve to go to jail. I should rather go to a psychiatric facility and then be released so that I can go and visit the graves of my children, which is actually what she said. And she was more focused on apologizing to her mother than what she had done. It's really...
Had she not?
I wish you could say that it was a personality disorder, or it was postpartum depression or something. Sometimes it's just
there isn't any evidence, or there isn't enough evidence to diagnose someone with that kind of condition, that they still do terrible things.
Yeah. Look, I mean, she just wanted to stick it to her mother, to the people she was angry at, and she did it in the worst possible way. I mean,
yeah, at the basic level of it, yeah, there was a lot of anger. And I don't think it was one incident that sparked it off. It wasn't the argument she had with her mother the day before. I think it was a culmination of many, many different things.
Yeah.
And that ended up just being one of them.
How much of a factor would you say that the rejection of her sexuality in her kind of family, maybe in her community, how much of that was a factor in just her general kind of mental state?
I think it was actually a huge thing, because she kept saying, that the family didn't accept that part of her, that she wanted to be able to live her life to the fullest in terms of what she wanted from relationships. And I think it's also, there were times in the community where she said people had brought that corrective rape, that there was a lot of hatred towards that part of her life, and that she had engaged in these sort of short-term heterosexual relationships almost with the sole goal of becoming pregnant. So even the male partners that she had were very short-lived. So 2 months, 3 months, and she was pregnant, and then she would break it off with them.
Okay.
So I think it had a huge role to play, massive.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that she was even talking about, the fact that she's managed to find good relationships in the prison system.
The prison, yeah. She had found a partner in the prison. There was another awaiting trial prisoner, and she was happy about that. And that was quite an important thing for her, that she mentioned it quite a few times.
Okay. Okay. I mean, any behaviors kind of, post her arrest, or any other behaviors that stand out as interesting in the kind of, just in the context of the aftermath of the act? Any other behavior you can point out with regards to her?
Look, she did sort of tried to commit suicide when she first got to the prison. So she had found a mirror and she had broken the mirror, but another prisoner actually stopped her and took the mirror away from her. So she didn't actually cut herself. And that was like the first reaction after she got to prison. What was interesting, and I know I mentioned this earlier, was she wanted to visit the graves of her children and apologize to her mom. That was quite important to her. But, ultimately she was found guilty of murder, and she was convicted and sentenced to 22 years and 6 months for each murder, but they were to be served concurrently.
Okay. Sorry, I hope you get it. Okay. Let's actually take a look at some of the questions and comments here on the group. Let's go there.
Yeah, they're popping up.
Okay. Yes, the sound does keep cutting off a little bit from me as well. Apologies for that. Again, I just think it's a little bit to do with the lightning storms rolling around the city. Thank you both. Are there a specific set of questions asked? Okay, here we go. Are there a specific set of questions asked, or is it just more of a casual conversation where the psychologist comes to a conclusion about the perpetrator? So yeah, I mean, is it quite a formal interview that you do, or is it a more of a chat?
No, it's definitely formal. So we start off, there's like a specific process that you follow when you're doing any kind of interview like this. Even if you just go to a psychologist, we do a form of a structured clinical interview. So what this is it fulfills two purposes in the beginning. So we get a full history of the person. So that means like, who did you grow up with? Who are your brothers and sisters? Where did you go to school? Where did you work? What are your medical problems? Have you seen a psychologist or a social worker before? What are some of the medications you've taken? Is there anything
that, comes up with your employment history. So that's a really structured kind of interview, and it follows a format and it follows certain questions. What then happens after that in terms of a forensic assessment is, by that stage, you should have built up enough of a rapport with the person. If you're a good forensic psychologist, you should be able to build that rapport within the first 10 minutes. So they're a lot more forthcoming with the information. But the idea is, after you've done the structured interview, you then move on to getting their narrative of what happened. So from your perspective, what was the build up to everything? So in the weeks or the months before, what were some of the things that you dealt with? Then you do the day before the event, you do the day of the event itself, and then you do after the event. So that's quite a long structured thing. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that, you should be able to come up with some kind of a working diagnosis, even if it's differential. So in other words, a number of different diagnoses that you can then work off. What happens with the report is it's all that information that's been consolidated. And then what you do is you also do a research component to it. So what is some of the relevant research that's come out of the field within the last 5 years? So for example, in this particular case, it's what we refer to as filicide. So that's the murder of a child by a parent or a caregiver. And that then, there's a set of research that's associated with that in terms of what are the motives that have come out according to the different models and those sort of things. And in this particular report, they wanted to also know about premeditation and impulsivity. So that was also part of the discussion that we had. And it was a lot about what caused her to kill her children. And according to the models that are available, it was decided that it was a retaliatory filicide, mixed in with a bit of the unwanted child kind of motivation. It's quite a process. Let me put it that way. It's not like an hour. This takes 3 or 4 hours to go through. It's not quick.
In your assessment, do you leave room for? Is there a room for your emotional reaction, your kind of instinctual reaction, your feelings about someone, or do you try to kind of eliminate that from your work and from what you're doing, or do you try to let a little bit of it in so you kind of like, hey, how am I responding to this person on that level?
Okay, so the whole point of, especially forensic psychologists, but just psychologists in general, is you have to suspend your personal beliefs. You have to suspend your bias, anything that is subjective. So you have to go in really objectively. You have to go in specifically just to deal with what is going on, what is presented in front of you. I think it's very important to keep that, because our primary job is as clinicians and diagnosticians. So we go in there with the sole purpose of being able to diagnose and figure out what happened. I think that's really important, is that you have that idea of you have to be objective. There's no space for bias whatsoever. So even if you don't agree with something that they've said, or you find something that they've said are like really horrifying, it's like deadpan poker face. You can't let anything come through.
Okay. And you interviewed her over how many sessions, Kirsten? You said?
I was only able to see her for the one session, but
okay.
It lasted 4 hours and a bit.
And then if you were to just summarize top line what your assessment was and what your kind of primary feedback was.
So what the report basically found was that she had killed the children out of a retaliatory filicide mixed with the unwanted child. And it pulled into a little bit about the impulsivity and the premeditation. So there were elements of both. In this case, there was the premeditation. She had been thinking about it for 24 hours. There was a lot of mulling over the different ways that she was going to do it.
And then the impulsivity kind of came from the fact that she was going to use what she had available in the home. There was no sort of going out and specially buying stuff or getting things that she needed to do. So it was a blend of impulsivity and premeditation. She wasn't diagnosed with any clinically significant psychological disorders. She did have some medical conditions that were highlighted as being possible concerns, but they didn't appear to have a direct impact on what actually happened that day.
Okay. Did she discuss the method selection and whether or not she'd considered alternative methods, or, had she battled with how to actually do it?
No, she had thought about it generally and then settled on this particular method as being the easiest one to use, the one that was like sort of most freely available to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, what are your thoughts on what the ultimate sentence was for her, and what the, on the punishment component when in relation to her?
I thought it was adequate. Normally, the sort of max that can be given for life is 25 years. So I think it was a fair sentence.
Okay. Yeah. And look, I mean, she'll likely be up, she likely won't necessarily serve all of that sentence. And, is she the kind of person that you would consider to be a risk going back into society again?
Probably not. I mean, it would, a lot would depend on how she behaves in prison and what sort of interaction she has with rehabilitation programs within the center. So like the anger issues and all that. By the time she gets out, she's going to be well into her 50s. So age becomes a low determination of risk. In terms of being older, you have a lower risk. The type of crime would be taken into consideration, but in all honesty, her overall risk would probably be quite low. But again, it would depend on how she behaves and what happens after all of this.
Do you ultimately think that she considers herself to be responsible for these murders?
No, that didn't come across at all. She came across as regretful, but not remorseful, which is an important distinction.
So would you say she kind of then she blames the people that pushed her to do it for the murders, essentially, kind of externalizing the blame, if you like?
She did, yeah. She did.
Okay.
Hopefully she's come up with a bit more insight since then. I'd hope that she's had the chance to at least get some kind of interaction with the psychologist within DCS, or at least the social workers, and be able to come up with, her taking responsibility and accountability for what she did.
Yeah. I mean, the big question, as we move into the future and we have more and more technologies at hand to be able to kind of to help us solve crimes and what have you, ultimately you hope for a world where kind of preventative measures can become sophisticated to the level that you're really able to identify people that are potential problems in society, behaviors that might be kind of leading people down a bad path. In this case, do you consider that there was anything that could have been a reasonable, a warning sign that people could have or should have maybe picked up on? Any behaviors, any actions that...
Yeah. Okay. So there's typically things that we look for that are, red flags, like substance use and alcohol, so excessive drinking. She has stopped drinking. She was a binge drinker, but she had stopped drinking in 2012. So that wasn't a red flag at all. According to the information that I got from the collateral sources, she actually came across as being quite a good mom. She physically cared for the kids. She was involved. She looked after them. She made sure they were clean. She made sure they were fed. So there was, she didn't physically neglect them. She didn't abuse them. There was nothing there to kind of point to red flag as, and this person is possibly an issue.
there's other things that we look at as well in terms of being red flags and risk factors, but she didn't peak on very few of them, and there was very little warning that this was something that she could possibly do.
Okay. And then lastly, what are your feelings about this case? What are your feelings about her? If you obviously maybe half with your kind of forensic psychologist hat on and just half as Kirsten, how do you weigh up this case? How do you feel about Busisiwe? How do you feel about the case itself?
This was a hard case for me because my kids were round about the same ages. So it was difficult from that perspective. From a clinical point of view, though, it was an interesting case in terms of the dynamics that were at play, that it wasn't a clear-cut thing of, well, she's got narcissistic personality, or she's antisocial, or she's psychotic. It wasn't like a clear-cut case from that point of view. And I think one of the things that was a little frustrating was it would have been easier if it had been one of those things. It would have explained it a lot neater. It would have been a little bit more, I don't know, like, oh, this is the reason exactly why she did it. Whereas this seems very vague and not very satisfying, if I could put it that way, to not be able to label her as being, all right, so she's a psychopath.
Yeah. Or just to think of her as a terrible person. I mean, it's hard to not think of someone like Busisiwe just as a terrible human being. But at the same time, it is important to understand and interrogate all of the circumstances that kind of led her to where she got to. How much nurture versus nature is at play in Busisiwe, do you think? I know that's a little bit of a,
It's a tough question always. That I always think it's kind of 50-50. That there's always elements of nature that are involved. I think in the same way that you're born with a predisposition for certain medical disorders, you are also born with a predisposition for certain psychological things or certain behaviors. Having said that, though, I think the environment in which you grow up in, but also exist in, I think that's also important, is there's that environment of that nature, the nature part of it combines with the nurture part of it. I don't think it's as simple as saying it's one or the other. It's generally always a combination.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, luckily, I imagine that in your time at SAPS, you didn't come across too many cases like this. But they are out there, Kirsten. They do happen. And,
you do.
Probably with more prevalence than we know about, because so many crimes are not reported on in South Africa and just don't make it to any kind of newspaper or social media platform, do they?
No, I mean, even if you have a look at this case, there's very little media on it. There was very little carried in the press. The community was in an uproar because obviously it happened so close to home and they really struggled with it. But I mean, it didn't make much of a ripple in terms of anything else.
Yeah. Again, I mean, in these weeks where there's a particular focus on particular types of violence in society, it is also hard not to kind of go, well, all fair and well when there's a campaign going on and there's some kind of pressure to also, be doing your part on a social media platform or what have you. But there is generally too much apathy when it comes to crime, and we are too desensitized to it as a population, surely.
Look, I think everybody carries in South Africa carries like some level of PTSD in them, whether it is something that they, whether it's actually diagnosed. But I mean, for certain, there's vicarious trauma, which is, where you hear about stuff happening to someone else who's close to you, or who they've been hijacked or they've been a home invasion or something like that. That there is definitely a trauma response that's connected to all of those things. And I think that we live with it because what else can we do? You have the fears and you just put as much in place as you can to keep yourself safe and your family safe. And it is just sadly a reality, I think, that we faced with in South Africa. But having said that, I mean, I know I know that it is, how can I put it? It's becoming a bit more of a wide issue as opposed to being like something that is totally isolated to South Africa. I think that there are incidences in the UK, I mean, elsewhere in the world that are also, there's hotspots of crime. I mean, if you don't go to the UK and visit all areas of the UK because there's crime that's worse in some areas.
Look, we're going to start to have some really uncomfortable conversations, which are difficult to have given the kind of discourse and the kind of rules of engagement, because in the world, we've got to be a lot more sensitive to people's feelings and how they react to opinions they don't like to hear, because opinions can be violence against people right now. But certainly, I think it's time in South Africa, and you're right, in plenty of parts of the world, there are where these kind of hotspots of crimes that we should be able to deal with as a civilized society. It should be fairly obvious that the first people that we want to protect are your own women and children. They shouldn't be your primary victims. And so we have to ask ourselves what culturally is going on in a society where your primary victim tends to be your wife, your sister, your mother, your daughter, your family members, the people that are supposed to be the closest to you and the people you're supposed to care for and protect the hardest,
I think there's been quite a few studies that have been done on this particular root cause of gender-based violence in South Africa, locally, which is great, where it's come across really strongly that it's quite entrenched within the patriarchal nature of our society and the sense of machismo, or this, the need to be this dominant person within relationships, within communities, that's actually quite deeply entrenched in South Africa. And that's something that is really rooted in culture as well as society, which makes it very hard to change. Those attitudes would need to be different or adjusted, I think, in order for those types of crimes to be able to be stopped.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you, final words, Kirsten. We've been going on it's 20:09 now, and I think we've had a really great chat about this, and I appreciate your time, but I don't want to keep you too long. Stepping away from the case itself, I think we've kind of wrapped up that discussion, but now talking about the kind of context of this week and just violence, what do we do? What do you think are some of the steps that we need to take as a society to start to deal with our violence and our crime problem? From somebody that's been at the cold face of the worst kind of violence in our society.
That is such a large question.
I know. That's why I don't know how to solve where does your mind go with that question?
Societal change, which is not going to be a quick fix. We're talking about attitudes that are so deeply part of what we've been taught growing up. What we've been taught in the media, what we've been taught in just everyday interactions, and how we treat people, and kindness and the lack of kindness. There's a lot of different prongs that have to be approached here for it to work. And I think that the more we support those efforts, the better things will be. I don't think this is a case of, well, it happens to other people, so it's not my problem. I think that's really important.
No, it happens to everyone. I'm always reminded, and I think my final word on this will just be that, that kind of kill it with kindness, that ultimately, yes, it's important to understand who the problem sectors of society are, who the problem portions of a population are, and to point that out and to kind of call people out on their behaviors. But at the same time, it's important, I feel, to start to create a space that you can invite people into, to have more of a, to have a hug and talk about what's happened and what's wrong and why are you so traumatized and why do you want to react in a violent way? I think we need to start to figure out how to find that aspect of the national dialogue. How do we kind of reach out with love as opposed to just wanting to kind of point fingers at where the problems are around our society?
I know you and I briefly touched on this earlier before we started the podcast, but I mean, there was a colleague of mine who did a study in the Western Cape of serial rapists. And what she found was that every single one of them had some kind of a relationship difficulty with their mom, whether their mom was absent, whether she was neglectful, physically abusive. But every single one of them had some kind of trauma in their background and their history. And I think that maybe one way of approaching this is to start in the home. So the idea of, teaching not just your daughters to be safe, but your men to be safe as well. And that means safe as victims, but safe, from committing violence, that there's attitudes and things that need to be entrenched early on in order to support the changes in society that are needed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kirsten. Well, I mean, I like I said, I think we could talk about this all night long because it's such a big topic. And I doubt we're going to solve all the problems of South Africa tonight. But at least, on a podcast like this, we can chip away at it bit by bit, and we can talk a little bit about some of the actual realities of crime and how it unfolds uniquely and specifically in our society and in our culture, and how we can start to address the kind of homegrown realities that we really do confront. And I think it seems like, this is an instance where the ultimate betrayal of family, the ultimate act of evil against the people that you're supposed to most love. And we should remember that when the family is strong, and that doesn't have to be a mom and a dad and it doesn't have to be a traditional, it just needs to be, there need to be strong, positive role models, setting a good example, guiding you on the right path, pulling you away from the pool when you're about to step in and then letting you fall in once or twice. We need to look at rebuilding the family unit. And maybe this is a case that kind of reminds us that this is how fractured it can become. And we really need to do everything that we can to protect those loved ones around us first and foremost, because if they're at risk, then everyone's at risk, aren't they? Violence can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Sad but true.
Thanks, Kirsten. It's been wonderful as always having you join me. Hopefully the next time you're on, Gerard will be with us as well. And you guys can have a much, Gerard asks much smarter questions than I do. And it would be nice to have the three of us on again. So hopefully I know that we'll do this again sooner than later, and we'll discuss another one of the cases that you've worked on or come across in your career. And as always, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your time. And I think we spotted someone in the background there. I hope he's enjoying his cup of tea. We had some banging and knocking going on for a bit, but I'm glad everyone's happy. We're all thanks, Kirsten. No, I'm just being silly. Appreciate you taking the time, and we'll see you again soon. And appreciate you taking the time, like I say.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Kirsten. Okay, guys, so that's us for tonight. Gerard will be back next week. And, we'll have his ugly mug back on the TV. He's off gallivanting around Canada this week. In the meantime, please do hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please do like if you enjoyed the discussion. We had a nice meander tonight as well as tackling the case specifics. But we got there, and I certainly had a great chat. I love these Tuesdays hanging out, talking about the problems and how we might start to address some of them. Thank you as always. And from Profiler Africa and from me, good night. Now, where's that closing sequence?